Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of The Crowded Booth. The trade deadline is done. The Braves have made some moves. They didn't make a splashy one, but we're going to talk about that and more. Did they do enough at the deadline? On this episode of The Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
Happy Wednesday, everyone, and it's a familiar guest if you're listening and on YouTube as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like it as well. Will Maness, Will, appreciate you joining us once again. It's been a minute, more than a minute, been an hour or two since you've last been on. But we're here to talk a little bit about the trade deadline. Obviously, fall camp's getting going. We're going to ramp up college football coverage, but we've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about with this trade deadline. Will, you and I, we're kind of keeping up with it all day. And we're going to kind of talk tonight about, the three moves. They technically made four, but really three moves that they made, the additions they brought in to the organization. And did they do enough? And we kind of started off right here as Pierce Johnson. Does Pierce Johnson add any value? And Will, we kind of looked at this. He's been stellar so far, coming off, I think he struck out all three guys he faced last time out. Now, if he pitches tonight, we're recording this on Tuesday night. This is going to be obviously published Wednesday. He's been good so far. So I wanted to ask you this. Getting him out of Coors Field, is it enough to kind of unlock a middle innings guy that can bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's who Pierce Johnson is. He's just a high strikeout, middle relief guy. He's not going to be a closer. And a good thing for the Braves is they don't need him to be. We've got the back end of the bullpen pretty locked up. Just looking at his stats, I mean, he's been awful in Colorado with pitching to a 6 ERA this year, which is no surprise. But he was at San Diego before 2020 and 2021, really good in San Diego, 2.7 and a 3.22 ERA. So, I mean, there's definitely some upside there with him. Colorado's a hard place to pitch. I mean, if you interview any pitcher, I mean, they have to change their whole strategy when they go to Colorado just because of the air pressure. It's a lot more technical than I can talk to. the light air, you can't really throw change ups, some of them say. So just makes it that much more difficult.
They got him on July 24th. You obviously have to think that the factoring going from an organization that I don't know what Colorado's been doing over the past couple of years. I don't have a clue necessarily, but going from that organization to a place like Atlanta that not only is obviously in a win now mode, hands down, probably the best team in baseball on paper and on the field right now. But special guest right there. Absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's right.
Pete makes his return.
Come on, Pete. Right. Sorry about that.
But Pierce Johnson, is there going to be a plus in this by going to an organization? Like, how much of that boost do you think he gets? I mean, look, I don't know. I don't think he's a guy that's going to come in and shut the door down in the ninth inning of Game 7 of the World Series, but I think that he can be more effective when he's in a better situation.
Absolutely. The Braves do it so well. They're one of the best teams at it, I think, and putting guys in situations where they're going to succeed. With Colorado, they pinned him as the 7th or 8th inning guy, and if they had the lead, he was going out there no matter who was coming up. 3 lefties were coming up. He was going to get the ball. But the Braves aren't going to do that. They're going to put him in positions where he can succeed.
Put him in positions that he can succeed. You mentioned right there, he's not going to be thrust into high leverage jobs quite yet. But right now, he has pitched in 3 games. He's got a hold. He's 2 2/3 innings, 3 hits, 1 run. It was unearned. He did suffer the loss in that one. But he struck out 4 in 2 2/3. You mentioned kind of the high strikeout rate. And as we kind of transition, into the other moves, how do you like this move? Like you've mentioned that this is one necessarily that you feel good about. It's a guy, we're not going to be counting on him in the 9th inning. But I think with Jesse Chavez obviously still kind of, getting back on the mend, can he at least bare minimum fill that role? And look, Chavez was really good, like probably on his way to an all-star selection by the fan vote, maybe, potentially. Where do you like this move, kind of the grand scheme of things?
He, to me, looks like a 6th inning guy to come in, be that first guy out of the pen. If your starter gets you 5, he'll come out there in the 6th and just throw BBs, hitting near 100. just to give guys a different look. So, 6 innings usually never high leverage. He'll probably get clean innings, meaning he'll come in with nobody on, nobody out. He'll start the inning until he proves he can do more.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this next arm, Brad Hand, and it kind of goes into the sense of where does Brad Hand fit in this bullpen? Now, look, we mentioned, you talked about Pierce Johnson, a 6th inning guy. Brad Hand is a guy that was an elite closer. I mean, he had 1 or 2 years, Will, where he was like at the top of his game from that left-handed side. I know you did some research before we hopped onto this one. I mean, when you talk about Hand, season has not been what he wanted, but he's kind of like down the middle, pretty much average. You mentioned here. So
the last couple of years have not been. Yeah, the last couple of years have not really been his standard, or at least his prime. I mean, he's only 33, so you think he's probably got 2 or 3 more good years in him, especially as a reliever. But for this team this year, this Braves team, he's just going to be a left-handed specialist out of the bullpen. I was looking at his Baseball Savant page earlier. I mean, you said he's right down the middle, dead average. But against lefties, they're OPSing only in the 400s. Against some righties, they're OPSing over 1,000. And, again, being in Colorado, the splits are going to look off the charts, the home and road splits. But overall, 4.5 ERA, it's not terrible. I wouldn't think. ERA plus of 111, as long as you're above 100 for ERA plus, 100 is average. You're good there. But, he's going to come in, face a lefty, maybe 1-2 batters max. Just try to get the Braves out of jams.
Yeah, Grant McCauley, Braves radio reporter, does some good work, obviously, with the Locked On Atlanta podcast. He talked about, and he actually put a picture up that Dylan Lee was throwing off the mound and starting to kind of get back. So, Will, adding Brad Hand, to me, you get 2 things. One, you get 3, I don't want to say veteran, but Dylan Lee has pitched in so many big games, especially after he had to start that World Series. You get 3 guys who have been in primetime moments in the bullpen on the left-handed side. We know what A.J. Minter, when he's on, and he seemingly turns it on in the postseason, he can get lefty or righty out. So can Dylan Lee. So for Hand to slot into this role, that's where I love it. And then 2, you get him in a sense of where he's not having to come in and be, we talked about it earlier with Pierce Johnson, the guy. Like he's not going to have to come in and be the 8th inning guy. I mean, he is going to be a matchup heavy guy. Obviously, you have the 3-batter minimum, but how much did you think that went into it of knowing, hey, now we got 3 guys, lefties, that we can roll into the postseason and we can play those matchups. And we've probably got 2 guys who are more comfortable in high leverage situations, but you got a veteran that's been there, done that, and been in big moments.
Yeah, Brad Hand, to me, I've got a lot of faith in Brad Hand. If the Braves can kind of right the ship, seeing what he's done, he's a 3-time All-Star. He's pitched in a ton of playoff games. He was on those good Cleveland teams, late 2000s. They were in the playoffs, so he was closing games in the playoffs. So, if Braves can get him right and get him comfortable and get comfortable with him, to me, he's a high-leverage guy to get that lefty out. This is looking way ahead. A lot of things can happen, but just thinking about facing Houston in the World Series, they got Kyle Tucker. They got Yordan Alvarez, big left-handed hitters that just mash right-handed pitching.
Yeah.
If they come on with a guy on base or 2 outs in the 7th, 8th inning, you throw Brad Hand in there, I got a lot of faith he can get them out. But that experience he has, Minter's got to obviously pitch in the World Series. Dylan Lee, like you said, pitching in the World Series. Brad Hand's been in a lot more playoff games. He's older. He probably knows himself and his stuff maybe a little bit better than those 2 guys do. But I like Brad Hand a lot. I think this is a really good move, especially seeing what the Braves gave up to get him.
Yeah, and that's another thing we kind of talk about. They didn't really give up anything, in essentially prospect capital. Nothing that you're worried about. And 2, we've kind of gotten to the point with this team, and this is just where I said, we've talked about this a lot. Ralph and I've talked about it a lot on the podcast. Like, I just trust this front office. Like, the evaluation that they do, 100%. You and I've talked about this, the way that they kind of vet all of these things. It's not that these kids may not pan out. It's just saying, hey, we can part with this right now because we may have something down the line that, the prospects list don't know about. And that's all kind of availability. You and I've talked about that. Going back to Brad Hand, ever since the All-Star break, this was before he got traded, obviously this week, or today, and in fact, there's been some really good signs. He allowed just one run and on 3 hits over 6 innings, and 4 of those 7 appearances that he has had were at Coors Field. So maybe starting to get into a groove. You get him into Truist Park, which isn't necessarily a pitcher-friendly park, but it's no Coors Field, that's for sure. But as we kind of wrap up the bullpen conversation here, I mean, Joe Jimenez was lights out in July. That's the Joe Jimenez that Atlanta thought they were giving when they traded former Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket Justin Henry Malloy, a guy that I really like, not just because I got a chance to obviously talk with him, but really in the sense of that's a guy that's a nice little piece for the Tigers. You get Joe Jimenez. Minter is obviously getting his way back. Kirby Yates has been really solid in his role. You got Colin McHugh. Raciel Iglesias, people put on the Facebook groups, we need a closer. He is going to be the closer. So, Will, as this bullpen kind of shapes up.
I was saying the same thing until the middle of June. I was like, well, Iglesias was out. Yates was still finding his footing in the back end of the bullpen. I was like, who's gonna finish these games? The Braves have one of the best offenses of all time. We need somebody to get 3 outs in the 9th inning, and everybody they were rolling out was not giving me a lot of faith.
Yeah, and I think, too, when you see Iglesias and all those guys, that's 7 out of potential 8 bullpen spots. Obviously, Jesse Chavez could come back. You have maybe a guy that can be that swing guy that could, in case a starter has a bad outing. And that's all assuming that Atlanta goes with that 5-man rotation whenever they get to that point once again. But I feel good about the bullpen.
Yeah, another note on the bullpen. The way the modern game is now, you've got to have a deep bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
Just go and getting 2 more arms, major league arms. That's going to be huge down the stretch in the playoffs. Starting pitchers not as emphasized as they once were, which disappoints me, hurts me. I like to see a starter go out and throw 9 innings and shut an offense down. But, I mean, again, really good moves. Didn't give up a lot. Adds depth to the bullpen. It's really what the Braves needed.
It's what they needed. Like you said, you and I were talking about this today. The lack of impact lefty arms at an affordable price made Brad Hand probably the best option. We talked about this. Hader, I wouldn't have been against it. Like, I would not have been against Josh Hader, but you knew what your prime prospect capital or major league capital you'd have to give up to go get him, and he's a rental. You also get to a guy in the Mets.
You look at the moves the Padres made today. They were going to want major league bats because they went out and got 2 good bats at first base. So thank good Braves steered away. Just ride what you got. You got the best team in baseball right now.
You're right what you got. You mentioned that offense that is league leading 201 home runs now as a team that is like 15, 20 ahead of everyone else, maybe 30. It's close to it. I think the Dodgers are in second with like 180 something. There's some teams that won't sniff 200 homers. I think it was like 430 something. The guy it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So it brings us to the acquisition that they made, and it's Nikki Lopez, kind of a do-it-all guy for the Royals. And so it kind of begs the question of, will he contribute? And what does that look like? And Ralph in the background, as we're recording this, Harris has hit 2, Arcia hit 1. So you got to love that. So Nikki Lopez, this is a guy that has played nearly everywhere. 2021, we were talking about before we started recording, as the everyday shortstop. He hit 300, stole 22 out of 23 bags. So, Will, he's a guy. And look, I love Charlie Culberson as much as the next Braves fan. But if we get to a playoff series and Arcia gets a tight hamstring or, fouls one off the inside of the ankle, Nikki Lopez has shown the ability to step in and play at least major league average more consistently and more recently than Charlie Culberson has. Kind of your thoughts on this move?
Just another really good depth move. I mean, take a look at the organization. Who do the Braves already have on the big league roster? Who do they have in AAA that they could bring up and could be just a glove? I mean, we've been talking about the offense. The number 1 lineup is 9 deep. The Braves, if they have an injury, they can afford to just bring in a guy that is going to be glove first. That's Nikki Lopez, play short, second, third. He can run, so there's a pinch run option there. I mean, and we're talking about his stats earlier. He batted 300 in 2021. So the guy can handle the bat. He can find holes. And he's even played some outfield this year and first base. Look at his baseball reference page right now. So does it all. A good utility guy.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, you get a guy that can play multiple positions. He can give some guys some days off, and you don't have to use, roster moves. You don't
It's
have
going to
to
be
use
tough.
options.
That's
Yeah.
tough with this Braves team. They all want to play every day.
Yeah. And I think going back to it, I mean, they designated Culberson for assignment to bring him on. We love Charlie Culberson, what he's done for the Braves franchise. Obviously, a guy from Rome, Georgia, in that area as well. But I think, kind of as we talk about this, the playoff push. Lopez is a guy that's going to be really fun to watch. I'm not going to get too much into it, but another guy that I think could be put on a postseason roster for the simple fact of running the bases is Forrest Wall. Like his speed. They had Gerard Dyson a couple years ago,
Hey,
like in that
we
role.
know Brandon Gaudin was excited about
Yeah, he's practiced sliding. Have you seen that video? Have you seen the video of
Brandon
Brandon
Gaudin.
Gaudin sliding into second base?
No, no, I'm
Oh,
talking about what he said on TV.
yeah, he was also excited about there too. Yeah, no, that was definitely true. But that's kind of the Braves trade deadline. Nothing really flashy. And it brings me, and I'll go first in this. Nothing flashy. But what they did do is they shored up areas that I don't want to say they were desperate needs. Like you didn't need to go get Nikki Lopez, but you had the chance to. You get guys that like Pierce Johnson. I don't know what he's going to pan out to be. Um, it's nothing that necessarily needs to move the needle right now, Will. But you and I are talking about this. Does it move the needle in October? And that's what's going to matter. And if this Braves front office feels like it does, to where if they get a starter that only goes 4 innings, Johnson can come in the 5th inning and pitch a clean 5th, then we're all going to look back on August the 1st and say that was a really good idea. I think we all trust AA. Kind of your closing arguments for why or why not did the Braves do enough here at the deadline?
It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, we talked about it leading up to this trade deadline. With the expanded playoffs, it felt like there was really only 5 or 6 true sellers across the league. So it was going to be hard to bring anybody in. So kind of had a feeling it would be kind of a quiet deadline for the Braves, which is what it was this year. I think there's a lot of evidence to be hopeful that the Braves did enough. But they're putting a lot of faith that Max Fried and Kyle Wright are going to come back and be the dominant starters they were on that World Series team.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Chip Carey always used to say when he was the broadcast of the Braves, those are just like deadline acquisitions. And Max Fried getting close. Kyle Wright, we probably expect to see at the end of August, maybe September. And the question has to be asked too, how much can he really ramp up before? How many starts does he need to where he feels like, he can really go? And we have to expect too, are we going to get the Kyle Wright that we saw last year? I don't think so. But I think we could see the Max Fried that we saw at points last year.
Positive of both of those guys. If they can't get ramped up and be starters, you can throw them in the bullpen in October and get 3-4 innings. I mean, there's no bullpen that has guys that have 3 or 4 pitches like those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it will. It's going to be one of those things where we have to kind of wait and see. I mean, did the Braves do enough? We're not truly going to know that answer until the months of September and October. But until then, we got a lot of baseball left to play as Atlanta continues that march on pace for 100+ wins at least. And none of that matters if they can't get to the postseason and make a deep run. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that as well. We appreciate you for watching here on the Crowded Booth YouTube channel. We've had some great content come along. College football content continuing to ramp up. We got our Dynasty streams. We're going to have Braves content sprinkled throughout the postseason run. And to make sure you know where it all is, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, set up notifications so you know when we are dropping the latest content as well. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you might get that audio, even if it's on the radio, we appreciate you. Make sure to follow, like, shout that out as well. For Will Maness, my name is Bryce Koon. We will catch you next time here on another episode of The Crowded Booth.